Executive Director of the Florida Redevelopment Association, and today we are broadcasting a webinar out of Tallahassee, Florida, in conjunction with Joe Corradino, who is in Doral, Florida, i.e. Miami, and he has been kind enough to agree to head this webinar on mobility and multimodal options to support various levels of intensity. Well, the planners in this group and the redevelopment folks who know transit, they will understand exactly what this title means. But for someone just starting out in the transportation world in Florida, Joe can tell you it is interesting at the best and challenging at the worst. Hey, we're hoping to help you understand the variables that go into transportation planning from a redevelopment point of view, because as Joe likes to say, it involves land use and it also involves money. Now, this session, 2017, if you can believe it, we are probably going to be looking at an attempt or a push by the counties to fund redevelopment transportation projects and singularly appoint dollars to fund them. This may be a good thing, this may be a bad thing, we don't know, it depends on the wording, but transportation nonetheless is on everybody's mind now in Florida that the economy is back. So without further ado, I wanted to, excuse me, I forgot the housekeeping items. If you have a question, see the box on the right and please email them into us and we will get to them either in the body of the presentation or afterwards. And remember, no question is too simple. And also, this will be recorded and posted on our member site at redevelopment.net under My FRA. So that is also available. And the last thing is we appreciate your support of the FRA. And if you have any questions about the Florida resources we provide, check out on redevelopment.net or call me, Carol Westmoreland, at 850-701-3608. So, Joe, I'm tossing it to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be able to help with this webinar. What I wanted to talk about today is a little bit about multimodal mobility and what is it, why we need it. I was going to go over a couple of case studies that we have, a micro example for a city in Miami-Dade County, Doral, a macro example from southern Miami-Dade County, and then a comparison between the various modes of transportation that we're looking at. We have a problem in Florida, as everybody knows. It's a transportation problem, but it's not only that, it's a land use problem. You know, our roads are clogged. We want things that we don't necessarily need. Transportation infrastructure is extremely expensive, and we need to think of a way to get there a little bit faster. We need to think of multimodal capacity. We need to think of joining our transportation and land use together, and of course, linking this with economic development. So when we get down to it, there's a lot of difficult decisions to be made, and again, transportation infrastructure alone will not solve the problem. So just by way of introduction, my name is Joe Corradino. I am president of the Corradino Group. We're engineers and planners with about 150 people headquartered in Doral, Florida, 6 offices across the country. Really built our practice on providing practical solutions for complex local government problems. And what that means is I really want to be able to get decision makers the best information they can have to make quality decisions and let them understand it enough so they can explain it to their constituents, because these are complex problems. So what is multimodal transportation? You know, really what I'm telling you about this stuff is capacity on our roadway networks or our street networks for each mode: pedestrianism, cycling, car driving, and transit. Today we call it complete streets. I used to call it mobility. This kind of graphic here shows us what we're doing. We have very large rights of way that we have in Florida. They were built predominantly in an automobile-oriented era, and it's about retrofitting those things with various levels of capacity. We need to do this now because we have to keep pace with growth. Florida has been one of the fastest growing states in the union for the last 25 years. Likely that will continue. No government could possibly keep up with the pace of growth that we're experiencing here. And it's about providing efficient and effective infrastructure so that people can actually move. Look, our roads are congested, the people are frustrated, the transit, bike, and ped networks infrastructure is completely lacking, and this has economic consequences on our community, and I think that's the real problem, the real lever that will get this stuff working. This graphic here is really meant to show how we keep pace with growth. Florida, Miami-Dade County isn't a very old place. It's about 100 and something years old. The graphic on the right is kind of what we thought, I'm sorry, this is moving by itself, but either way, this is the red box, what people thought of Florida again back then, a swamp. The only two pieces of infrastructure were the pieces that were draining the Everglades. By the midpoint of the last century, Doral was not in the swamp anymore. It was kind of at the edge of the swamp. And if you were looking at it today, it's really smack dab center into a burgeoning, sprawling, huge metropolitan area. Pretty congested, but not dense enough necessarily to warrant transit. So we have a roadway problem, and that problem is exhibited by this graphic. If you looked at it today, you would see that the green and the yellow are good and the red is bad, and that we've got about half of our links are operating well. So the roadway system's operating well, but you look in the future, you can see that close to 75% of these things are beginning to fail. And the problem is that we have no alternatives for people to move to move. The transit system is weak, the bike system is weak, the pedestrian structure is weak. You know, the infrastructure is either physically hazardous, it's not comfortable for people to walk on, it could be dangerous. It's either foreboding, and people aren't willing to use it because it's just not practical to walk miles and miles and miles. It potentially puts you in conflict, physical conflict with other modes. If there's transit infrastructure out there, it doesn't have the amenities to go by. And the interesting part is this graphic, this picture on the right. Not to say it was wrong, this is just the way they designed things at a time, but this is a sidewalk, right, that a master degree planner or engineer put together. This thing was absolutely never meant for to really carry a pedestrian or a wheelchair or anything like that. And it's that shift that we've got to undertake. And so communities, smart communities, are beginning to aspire to different types of infrastructure represented by these graphics here. I mean, the rights-of-way, like I said, are between 50 and 100 feet. In really practical areas, they are carved up differently. Plenty of room for pedestrians, plenty of room for transit, nice and safe street trees, and those types of things. And so cities are beginning to diversify their infrastructure, their transportation infrastructure, not abandoning the roadways whatsoever, but they're starting to provide space within those right-of-ways for transit, bike, and ped. And there's, of course, a lot of policy that goes into getting this stuff done in the first place. Again, kind of complete streets like we talked about before. The fact of the matter is that the lever on this whole thing is economics, right? For an ever-growing number of people, an ever-increasing amount of their incomes are going to housing and transportation, particularly coming out of the recession. And it's absolutely true that housing costs rise closer to the urban centers, closer to the jobs. Transportation costs rise further from the urban centers, and the market or the people are constantly seeking this equilibrium. People are trying to make these reasonable choices of where they live and where they work, and with two working households, they're always trying to balance this. And so what's needed really is a land use issue, is how do we create places that has residential population that's affordable, and places where they're close to their jobs. So all of this stuff really comes together in Florida. It's a perfect storm of demography, geography, land use, and transportation, all of it resulting in congestion. It's not just specific to Miami-Dade County or South Florida. It's coming to you wherever you are in Florida. We all are going to have the same problems. It may have happened here first or in the Tampa, Jacksonville, or wherever earlier, but it's out there. The fact of the matter is that there are solutions. We need to keep pace with growth by providing that efficient and effective infrastructure so people can move. It's intelligent land use and transportation and zoning planning integrated in with our transportation plans. Of course, we need an eye towards the regional priorities, easy to implement, and then spreading the funding burden from predominantly 90% roadway funds to be, sharing some of those funds with other modes, and then regional coordination. Again, it's a roadway problem. They're getting worse, much worse, and it's about thinking differently. draining the Everglades mentality of the 1800s to the predominant infrastructure that we've put together, which is significant, costly, but it's filled up, right? And you see this graphic in the middle of a typical expressway clogged in both directions, 3 lanes of traffic. I mean, is there enough money to build another one of these next to it, or do we go to the right and use that infrastructure a bit differently? And I like to say it's all about capacity. There's about 70 people in these pictures in the foreground. The way we all get to work on the right is about 1.3 of us in an automobile, and it takes up both the travel lanes, it takes up both the parking lanes as far back as the eye can see for about 75 people. If you put those same 75 people on a bus, you take up the space of about 3 automobiles. So we're not saying that everybody's going to get on a bus in the future or a train or anything like that, but what we're saying is we have to provide the options, because soon the roads are going to be too congested to move. It's absolutely an economic problem. And if you think about this, think about the capacity that these modes carry. If you had 2 travel lanes for an automobile, it's about 1,600 people an hour that you might be able to carry. A bus rapid transit system, maybe 2,500 people. Light rail, maybe double that. Heavy rail, 10,000. So the solutions are out there. In the near term, it's really about shifting our investment dollars to the alternative modes. It's about integrating and locating hubs where you've got transit supportive land use and zoning, inserting that first mile and last mile infrastructure into it, and then connecting it in the long term with mass transit. And then, of course, you need to balance the alternatives. It's the balance between what we want and what we need, because these things add up to real money. And so communities need to ask themselves whether it's practical to build transportation systems, transit systems that carry 50,000 people a day when we only have a reasonable potential to carry 25,000 people a day. Again, you know, if you were buying a house for you and your spouse and you were looking for the 10-bedroom house for just the 2 of you, the bank's not going to lend you the money unless you have a substantial amount of income to deal with it. Same with municipalities. The federal government is not going to fund an overcapacity system because there are just too many needs nationally or even within individual regions that they can do that type of thing. So I wanted to talk again about these 2 case studies, that what the micro example and the macro example, then we'll get into the modes. So the first study was the city of Doral. It's a remarkably fantastic place. It's a very interesting community. It is a city of about, it's incorporated in 2003, one of 32 cities in Miami-Dade County, centrally located. And when I say all roads lead through Doral, that is true. It is bordered by 3 major expressways, and then it's crisscrossed by any number of roads, about 5 of them that cut directly across the community, expressway to expressway. And growth has exploded in Doral in recent years. These are graphics of what has happened in the last 20 years. You can see pine land and vacant land that has been consumed by sprawling one-level development, whether it be residential, commercial, or industrial, consuming nearly all of the land. And the pressure is still on. There are dozens of residential projects going up, non-residential projects spread throughout the city, mixed-use projects, and the city owns a lot of land itself where it can put in supportive infrastructure, which is a blessing. So the demography of the place, it's about 50,000 people in 15 square miles, a lot of families, relatively young, tons of jobs, 72,000 jobs. It's the downtown of western Miami-Dade County, but only a workforce of 18,000 people. It's young, affluent, mobile, but it's got these areas of distinct employment. It's got distinct residential population, but its problem is that it is it's got, like I said, people in Doral, waking people, close to 70,000 people wake up elsewhere in the region and get into their car and drive into Doral because there is no mass transit connecting Doral. Another 14,000 get up in Doral and go elsewhere, and that's not including the what I would estimate is tens of thousands of people, if not more, that come through Doral every day on their way to work somewhere else. So the congestion is absolutely stifling, and it's beginning to affect people's choices about where to work, where to locate their companies, where to live. And I think that you'll start to see these numbers start to change as people need to move closer to work. But Doral, thought a little bit ahead. Now, how do we get ahead of this thing? There is no mass transit plan for Doral. How do we make this sprawling community something that would be first in line for this mass transit should it come? And so they thought that this is a land use and transportation problem. Let's put together pockets of transit-oriented density. Let's link those modes with multimodal access. So when they incorporated, they had this vision. Their land use was guided by their comprehensive plan. Their transportation was guided by their transportation master plan. And soon after, you began to see great transit-oriented development start to spring up in nodes around the city. Projects like their Midtown project, projects like their Park Square project, their downtown, their new city hall, their gateways, the Landmark project, other types of projects that had come, transportation planning, that they were going to focus their energies on a fine, insignificant amount of multimodal transportation across the 15 square mile city. They decided to focus that transportation into the hubs. And they developed the hubs. They put their bicycle, that really what I call it the first mile, last mile infrastructure there, and then they connect these hubs on their corridors with their transit routes. Right now it's their circulator bus that they get from a sales tax money, but in the future that will grow as the hubs intensify, as the population increases, and as the needs warrant. Let's look at the second study, which is an area of southern Miami-Dade County. This is a large area. It's meant to show us how a sub-region can go about doing this. They function a little bit different. This place is huge. It's about 250 square miles. It's got about 120 square miles within a growth boundary that it's got. There are a few roads in and out, really I think 4 that connect the southern part of the community outside to the north. Its roadway network is a fractured grid of section line and half section line road with bottlenecks that spill traffic into residential neighborhoods because there are only a few ways in and out. And it's created traffic that's highly directional. You can see some of the network there. Again, it's not small. It's about half the size of a state, so it's a pretty big place. You can see the study area there on the left, and the developable area not in gray on the right. So it's kind of a barbell of development. The place consists of 5 different cities. It consists of a handful of unincorporated communities that will eventually incorporate. And again, it's 20 miles tip to tail. So it's in and of itself, it's as deep as Broward County is. So it's a monster to try to serve sub-regionally with transit. To add to that, its land use is not conducive to transit at all. Its future land use map is mainly estate density or low density residential. It's got, like I said, the urban development boundary, which you can see here is all the green to the west and even to the east. It's spread out and not much in the way of developed hubs at all. And that's the challenge if we're trying to retrofit transit into the community. So we've identified a handful of hubs that are existing and are burgeoning along the corridors, and we've worked on those. It's interesting that the population is there. It's got about 500,000 people now. It will grow to about 700 in the future. A little bit of that population is within the corridor, and that shows you how spread out it is. This is the population corridor there. It's the US 1 corridor that connects the Dadeland area with Homestead. Interestingly enough, it's going to grow in jobs, and a lot of those jobs are going to be around this corridor, but it's not going to shift the jobs to population. It's 50% of the land area of the county. It's 25% of the population and 12% of the jobs in this area. And so all these people are trying to travel out of the community every morning and back into the community every night, and the roadways are utterly congested. If you were doing a level of service analysis over the course of a day, or you would see that bidirectionally the roads function well, because it's highly directional traffic. It's a level of service F northbound in the morning, level of service A southbound in the morning, which balances to a C. But this is the issue. You've got close to 100,000 jobs in the community, and you've got all those residents. So 154,000 people wake up every morning and leave the community. Another 50,000 come in, and only 50,000 work and stay there. And that is completely out of balance. Not vastly different from Doral, just a bit opposite. Same problems, same issues. So we did an analysis, and we know where the people go from this community. And they primarily moving along the US 1 corridor route. So again, we focused on the formula. We looked at the existing hubs. We looked at convergent points relative to roadways, intermodal, and transit. And then we thought we needed to develop the hubs a little bit further. So we looked at the priority hubs, the connections between the two, and then infilling within the hubs with, again, the first mile and last mile infrastructure to make sure that there were paths for pedestrians and bicyclists. Connecting it with the surface transit routes, making sure that the roads connected the two, and then infilling, connecting those hubs with mass transit. The community is begging for an alternative part, choosing a mode in a community that typically exists in Florida. Typically, you would look at population, employment, the location of those things, and density. You would evaluate several alternatives. You would come up with the savings of time, the cost, the relative cost of the alternatives, the relative ridership, and then you would pick the mode. But over the last 20 or something years, that's not particularly the way that this planning has worked out. It's been mode-centric. People have picked modes first and tried to justify them and find out that the costs for something that they want but don't need is astronomical. And how do we get through this? Well, there are really three modes that you have to choose from: heavy rail, light rail, and bus rapid transit. I won't delve too deeply into them, but heavy rail is typically grade separated like a metro rail system. It's got to be grade separated because it gets its power from underneath. Light rail, less capacity, but can be on the surface because it gets its power from overhead. And bus rapid transit is a mode that can run in traffic if needed because it's on rubber tires and typically maybe an electric or gas vehicle. Bus rapid transit has really expanded the spectrum of high-level mass transit because it gives less dense communities a lot of opportunity to shift to a highly productive mass transit system decades earlier than would have been expected if they were trying to justify the traditional modes of light rail or heavy rail. Again, our federal priorities have changed. It's very difficult since the 1980s when these things were built. It's very difficult to fund these systems in low-density communities. It costs a lot of money. Maybe these things are changing back. So, we always figure, what does it take to get what you want? Well, I figure there's three things that got to converge. You got to want it, you got to need it, and you got to afford it. And so if you're out of one of those things, if you can afford it, it may trump everything else, but very few people can afford what we're asking for. So finding that affirmative answer to these questions has been really elusive in the last 40 years. So let's look at what you want versus what you need. And there are transit supportive thresholds that we go through, right? If you wanted low density regular bus service, like most of our communities actually warrant, you're in a situation where you'd have 15 to 30 people an acre from a residential perspective. And remember, South Dade a lot of times is less than that. It could be 1 unit an acre in many of the cities. If you really wanted light rail transit, you've got to be focusing on having more than 45 people an acre. That means you're going to have to start to put in nodes of population intensity to warrant the cost of this. From an employment standpoint in a community center, it's basically the same thing. If you want to justify anything higher than the lower capacity bus rapid transit, you're really going to need to have 45 workers per acre as a minimum threshold. So let's talk about capacity for a second. A bus rapid transit system can carry anywhere between 8,000 people and 35,000 people in a day. A light rail system carries a lot more. It carries between 35 and 80,000 people. And of course, heavy rail goes up. You can carry hundreds of thousands of people with a New York-style train. At the same time, the cost goes up dramatically. Again, rough cost, $20 million a mile for the low-capacity stuff. By the time you get into light rail, you may be at $60 or $70 million a mile. And then by the time you get into heavy rail, grade separated stuff, right away cost, you're up into $100 million a mile. And they're real tough choices when you start looking at these numbers, right? Time savings that you'll look at along with those costs is variable to each corridor. And you just kind of take a picture of these types of things and you start to understand what's the difference between the various modes. You're saving 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I mean, you're talking about minutes when you start to talk about time savings. And you got to figure what's that worth. So these are random numbers, not real numbers, but something that you might see in a community. You may have a bus rapid transit system that'll cost you $500 million to build. You may have a light rail system that costs $1.5 billion to build. Okay, well, I love the light rail. It's romantic. You know, it looks good. It's a train. It's high capacity. We can go crazy on that thing. And then you start to look at it, well, I'm going to save 3 minutes of travel time if I build the light rail system in. Okay, well, it's going to cost me $1 billion for 3 minutes of time. $1 billion. Is that system worth $330 million a minute? Those are tough decisions. So in most cases, the choice is really clear. When you start to evaluate modes, you start to get into numbers like that where you start to see these things come out. The trick of these analyses is conducting that necessary analysis first to see which mode actually comes out ahead. In the past, we've been too focused on the mode versus the service itself. That detracts. You know, the mode should be determined based on the available funding, the projected need, the capacity, the right-of-way constraints, and not chosen for its own sake. And again, a lot of times we're not going to be able in Florida to justify the mode that we want, which is typically a light rail or a heavy rail system or a streetcar system, without some land use changes. So these are difficult choices that we're dealing with. There are a lot to deal with community preference, a lot to deal with funding, ridership, and other constraints, absolutely wants versus needs. And what we found is that these problems absolutely do not solve themselves with transportation alone. We've got to redevelop our communities. We've got to combine the transportation planning with adequate land use and zoning, focusing on local nodes of intensity where you've got jobs and housing in the same place, the first mile, last mile infrastructure within those nodes, economic development initiatives to attract the development community to those places, and then we can begin to more adequately link those nodes with the transportation corridors so that we got the desired effect. That's my presentation. If there are any questions that you have, we'd be glad to answer them at this point in time. I really thank you for your attention.
Joe, thank you so much. That was a lot of information there. And I think that people who come back and review this, we're going to have even more questions. But we do have a few right now.
Great.
Number one, a lot of our members are not, you know, down in the urban areas of South Florida. So if you were a little city, let's say, but you were in the urban metro area near Orlando where transportation has been, you know, crazy issue as well, how do you think a practitioner that is a CRA director, somebody like that, how do they, what really grabs elected officials' attention from your point? This is a hard one. What could they kind of say or do or frame issues relative to the discussions about transportation within their boundaries and the discussions regionally? Because regional, I think, is really more important than within each city's boundary, right?
Absolutely. I understand the answer to this question. I'm an elected official myself. I'm a mayor of a small community named Pinecrest in Miami-Dade County, about 20,000 people. Nothing gets your attention more than unhappy people. Right. It's gotten to the point, I mean, traffic can be bad, but it can also be tolerable at certain times. When people are starting to lose money, when the businesses are starting to lose money, when they're starting to locate elsewhere, when people need to move out of the community because they're just too far from work or it takes an hour to get there, elected officials will take notice. And you're right, the key is regionally. A little community can't do much by itself. That's why I wanted to show everybody the Doral picture. Doral is trying to do it by itself, and it's doing a great thing. It will raise its competitive value by doing it itself, but it's going to need other nodes to connect to. And unless there's a reasonable regional priority and some type of consensus, you'll sit there in the case like Miami-Dade County. We haven't been able to have consensus for close to 3 decades, and we haven't built anything for close to 3 decades. So, you know, there needs to be a little bit of leadership. There needs to be a little bit of vision to come together around consensus. Again, I would think that most of our communities are absolutely, they're not dense enough to support high levels of mass transit. If we're going to want those and achieve those in the future, we have to start building those things in. CRAs may be great places to do that.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I'm going to, go even a step further. What kind of data do you think, on a pretty simple scale, a practitioner could collect that would kind of get the discussion going? I mean, you mentioned if you can track that people or businesses are leaving, I mean, how would they collect that kind of data?
About the businesses in or out, generally I think chambers of commerce may have that type of information. Tracking business uses, cities would likely have, you could look at building permits, right? You could look at housing starts, housing permits, residential housing permits. You obviously can look at your population from year to year. You can look at your tax revenues, your property values, and a lot of times when people are moving out, it's going down. I mean, Florida probably doesn't have a lot of places that are losing property value, but is it going up fast enough for you? And then when you really start to look at some of the travel patterns, if you got into your local region's travel demand model that your MPO puts together, that will have an extraordinary amount of data that may be useful to you from a 50,000-foot perspective about how people travel, where they go to and from every day, and the condition of those facilities.
Fantastic. And that's the Metropolitan Planning Organization?
Right. Every region will have one, and they all put together this thing called the Long-Range Transportation Plan Model. And they are excellent predictive tools.
Okay, excellent. What do you feel is the best way for a city or a county to plug into a funding mechanism? I mean, where's the money, Joe?
The money is typically with the federal government. I mean, you're going to be required. These systems are so gigantic that they're very rarely self-funding, and they are very rarely able to generate enough revenue to be profitable, if ever. And so you're going to need, federal help. And so that's where you got to start looking. But you've got to be competitive. And you're competing for a lot of these. If you want the big projects, you're competing with Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and you just got to have the numbers that work. And that's why we're thinking down here that what we absolutely need to do is make sure that we've put the land use in place that actually makes these projects competitive with the others. Because if you're at 15 units an acre, you're not going to win a transit system that supports 50 units an acre. And at that same point, you also need to have a system, not just a line. I think interconnected regionalism is also there. So the Fed's got the money. If the president-elect puts trillions of dollars into infrastructure, that dynamic may change. But we'll see. We'll see in January.
So you're not going to dare to look in your crystal ball and see what the odds are on that one? My gut feeling is that a great way to spur the economy and put people back to work is by building infrastructure. And if you looked at maybe not Florida, but if you looked at other parts of the country, the water, the sewer, the transportation is crumbling beneath everyone's feet. And in Florida, we're out of roadway space. We could use a train or two. It would seem that if you put $1 trillion into that, you'd get an instant bump in the economy, an instant bump in the employment rate, and you'd also be doing something very practical to make life easier for the everyday guy that goes to work. So I'm going to predict it happens. Wonderful. Listen, do the MPOs dole out this federal money? I mean, who's in charge of the money?
The Federal Transit Administration, the Federal Highway Administration. Typically, the projects would be put together through your MPOs. They may be the leader on the project, but they would ultimately apply to those federal transportation agencies.
And then what about FDOT? I mean, does FDOT?
Yeah, they're a funding partner in this. They would assist. I think that partnership between FDOT and the MPOs are also are critical, but the MPO is really the one that distributes the federal dollars in each region. They put together the long-range plans. Of course, anything that we planned would have to be on your 25-year long-range plan, which is governed by the MPO.
Okay, you got time for one more?
I got as much time as you want.
Okay. Is there a major transit system that you know of that operates 24 hours a day? And I presume that's in Florida, not in New York City. And if so, where would one find information about hourly ridership? What about congestion pricing? Making off-peak rides free or cheap?
Those are great tools. I don't believe that there's anybody that operates 24 hours a day in Florida. If you wanted to see 24-hour-a-day systems, they're in the larger cities: New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Washington, Los Angeles. Those tools, we call them travel demand management tools, peak hours, congestion pricing, those things. They are indispensable as a policy tool to incentivizing people one way or the other. And you're absolutely right. You know, if parking is $1 an hour in a downtown area, what's the incentive for somebody to hop on the train should it exist, right? And that's why if you were to go to these major metropolitan areas, you know, parking could be up to $25 an hour. Our problem in Florida is we don't have you could do that now, but there's no mode to move to. So you've got to put those demand management practices in place at the same time you're implementing your transit system. So make the transit system free in the peak hours and make the parking expensive in the peak hours, and you start to incentivize the shift. And like anything else, once people try this stuff, they will be, as long as it's competitive in time, say travel time, and the price, they'll stick with it.
Wow, you are a wealth of knowledge. I could just pick your brain forever, but I will not do that. And I'm really inviting you, Joe, to present at our annual conference next year. No pressure.
We'd love it.
Good. It's October 18 through 20 for all who are listening in Daytona Beach, Florida, 2017. We hope that you'll join us because topics like this and other really top on the list of redevelopment practitioners' minds will be covered, and we really look forward to it. Well, Joe, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'd just like to thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and if anybody wants to contact me, I'm sure you all can give out my contact info, but love to talk to anybody.
We certainly will, and we can't thank you enough. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.